In the history of the National Basketball Association, very few centers have left as deep an impression as David Robinson. Born in 1965 in Florida, Robinson was not only an outstanding player, but also an icon of discipline and honor in American sports. Throughout his career, which was almost entirely spent with the San Antonio Spurs, he achieved feats that earned the respect of the entire world. Robinson was the NBA Most Valuable Player in 1995, Rookie of the Year in 1990, and was selected to 10 NBA All-Star games in the 1990s. He made multiple appearances on the All-NBA First Team, won Defensive Player of the Year in 1992, and led the entire league in scoring during the 1993-1994 season. The peak of his career came when Robinson, along with the Spurs, won 2 NBA championships in 1999 and 2003, closing out his playing journey with a perfectly complete ending. For those contributions, he was inducted into the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame in 2009, becoming one of the greatest centers to ever step on the court. Outside the basketball court, Robinson is also remembered as a man of principle who served in the United States Navy, earning him the famous nickname, the Admiral. But behind that dazzling record lies a journey filled with invisible wounds that not every fan could see. Throughout the 1990s, Robinson often stepped onto the court with a calm smile and the demeanor of a leader. Yet inside, he was always fighting silent battles, the pressure to become the savior of an entire franchise, the painful playoff failures, and the criticisms that he was too nice to be a true champion haunted Robinson for many years. His body also paid the price for those on-court battles when serious injuries in the late 1990s nearly destroyed his career. There were nights when Robinson had to confront the fear that all his efforts still weren't enough to bring the glory the city of San Antonio expected. But it was precisely in those moments of doubt and pain that his will grew stronger than ever. Robinson didn't respond with anger or excuses, but with discipline, humility, and the determination to keep fighting. That very spirit helped him rise after failure, overcome injuries, and ultimately turn those years of doubt into the foundation for a great legacy that the basketball world still talks about to this day. If the story of resilience and the hidden corners behind the spotlight of David Robinson makes you think, please hit subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the untold journeys of sports legends. After the peak years and the dazzling lights the world saw in the previous part, David Robinson's story actually began very far from the giant NBA arenas. In 1965, in the state of Florida, a boy was born into a military family. Robinson's father was an officer in the United States Navy, an environment where discipline, responsibility, and sacrifice were taken for granted. Family life was therefore never stable in one place for long. They moved from city to city, from one military base to another. For a child, that meant repeated goodbyes, new schools, new friends, and often a feeling of being lost among unfamiliar faces. Robinson grew up in that context, few close friends, little sense of belonging anywhere, and most of the time having to learn to stand on his own. But that loneliness wasn't the only thing that made the boy different. When he entered his teenage years, Robinson's body began to grow so rapidly it was almost out of control. He grew taller year by year, month by month, until he became the tallest in his class, then the tallest in the whole school. Yet that height didn't bring confidence. On the contrary, it made Robinson feel even more out of place. He was lanky, awkward, with long limbs that hadn't yet adjusted to his own body. During gym class at school, Robinson was often the most clumsy one. Basketball wasn't his dream yet. In fact, Robinson wasn't even seen as a standout athlete in the eyes of many teachers and friends. He was just a smart student who loved math and science, someone likely to become an engineer in the future, or follow in his father's footsteps to become a naval officer. No one looked at that tall, skinny, slightly shy boy and said that one day he would become one of the greatest centers in basketball history. No one could imagine that the same boy would later carry the hopes of an entire city on his shoulders, stand under the blinding lights of the NBA, and battle pressures that only legends truly understand. But at that time, Robinson was still just a teenager trying to find his place in the world. A boy taller than everyone else, but still unsure if he truly belonged anywhere. In 1983, David Robinson made a decision that sent his life in a completely different direction. He applied to and was accepted into the United States Naval Academy, the prestigious officer training institution of the U.S. Navy. That wasn't the choice of a sports star seeking the spotlight. It was the choice of a young man raised in a military family who believed in discipline, honor, and duty. For Robinson, the path to becoming a naval officer seemed far clearer and more stable than the vague dream of basketball. When he set foot in Annapolis, he was simply a tall student who liked to play ball, not a sought-after talent. But Robinson's body still hadn't stopped growing. In his early years at the academy, he continued to shoot up at a pace that surprised even him. From just over 6 feet 10 to 6 feet 11, then nearly reaching 7 feet, that height made him stand out wherever he went. On the basketball court, it was a rare advantage. But in the military environment, it became a truly serious problem. The U.S. Navy had very specific regulations about the height of officers serving on warships. The narrow corridors, cramped engine rooms, and control systems on ships were designed for people with limited height. If too tall, an officer could have difficulty moving and working in the tight spaces of a vessel. As Robinson kept growing year after year, those in charge began to realize the uncomfortable paradox. This student might become too tall to serve on a warship. That put Robinson's future in a haze. If he grew too tall to serve in the Navy, the path he had spent years studying and training for could end before it truly began. But he also couldn't simply leave the academy to pursue professional basketball, because Naval Academy midshipmen had to fulfill service obligations after graduation. Robinson was caught between two worlds: military duty and the basketball talent that was gradually emerging. While his military future grew uncertain, something else began to change. On the Academy's basketball court, Robinson gradually discovered his true potential. Wearing the Navy midshipmen's basketball jersey, he was no longer the awkward, lanky high school kid. His long strides became more agile, his jumps more powerful. His shot blocking and dunking left opponents helpless time and again. Fans began to notice this tall student who carried the disciplined demeanor of a military cadet while possessing rare physical strength. In just a few seasons, Robinson turned himself into one of the most notable players in American college basketball. Scouts started showing up in the stands whenever Navy played. They noted every play, watched every step Robinson took, trying to assess the potential of a center with near-superhuman height, who still moved with astonishing fluidity. Yet even as his reputation began to spread in basketball circles, the biggest question still loomed. What would happen when Robinson graduated from the Naval Academy? Would he don an officer's uniform and serve on warships across the ocean? Or would he step into the National Basketball Association, where teams were starting to dream of owning this towering center? No one knew for sure. Even Robinson didn't have the answer. In the quiet nights of the academy dormitory, he thought many times about the road ahead. He had chosen duty. He had chosen honor. But now, his basketball talent was opening a door that very few people in life ever get the chance to walk through. If he grew too tall to serve on a warship, the military future might close. But if he abandoned the military path to pursue basketball, would he be betraying the values his family and the academy had taught him? Those questions weighed heavier than any physical training at the Naval Academy. Robinson wasn't someone who easily turned his back on responsibility. He believed in promises, in discipline, in the honor of a naval officer. But he also began to realize that basketball was no longer just a hobby. It could be his destiny. And as Robinson stood at the crossroads, one path leading out to the ocean, the other to the bright arenas of the NBA, he understood that his next decision could shape his entire future. One wrong choice could make both the military dream and the basketball dream vanish together. And in that moment, the future of the young man nearly 7 feet tall seemed more fragile than ever. David Robinson's future remained uncertain as his final years at the United States Naval Academy gradually passed. But by then, his talent on the basketball court had become far too obvious for the entire country to ignore. In his final college season, Robinson virtually dominated NCAA basketball, standing nearly 7 feet tall. With an astonishing wingspan and rare agility for a center, he became a nightmare for every opponent. Robinson's blocks were like an impenetrable wall in front of the rim. His dunks sent the crowd into a frenzy. And most importantly, Robinson wasn't just a big man. He played with the intelligence, discipline, and composure of a military cadet. When the season ended, Robinson's name appeared on every NBA scout's mock draft board. Many experts believed he could become the best center of his generation. And then in 1987, the moment that millions of young basketball players dream of finally arrived. In the 1987 NBA draft, Robinson was selected number 1 overall by the San Antonio Spurs. It was a historic decision. The Spurs were in a difficult phase, and they believed Robinson could be the one to change the franchise's fate. A center nearly 7 feet tall, smart, disciplined, and with leadership qualities, he seemed like the perfect fit. But as soon as Robinson's name was called, a reality that stunned many people emerged immediately. Robinson couldn't play in the NBA yet, not because of injury, not because of lack of ability, but because of duty. Robinson was still an officer in the United States Navy. After graduating from the Naval Academy, he had to fulfill his military service obligation. That meant Robinson couldn't suit up for the Spurs right away. Instead of stepping into the world's biggest basketball league, he had to enter another chapter of his life, the chapter of responsibility. Robinson was assigned to serve in the Navy for 2 years. During that time, he worked at naval bases, handled logistics duties, and managed operations. His days no longer revolved around games, but around training sessions, meetings, and military work. Occasionally, Robinson still practiced basketball to stay in shape, but he knew he was standing outside a world that was moving very fast. Each NBA season passed, other rookies began their careers. Players drafted in the same year as Robinson stepped onto the court, scored points, signed big contracts, and built their names. Meanwhile, Robinson waited. Waited in silence. Waited with discipline. Waited in a military uniform instead of a jersey. For many athletes, 2 years might not seem long, but for a young player at the peak of his physical prime, 2 years could feel like a lifetime. Robinson knew professional basketball was a ruthless world. New talent emerged every year. Opportunities could vanish after just 1 season, and sometimes he wondered, when he finally stepped into the NBA, would everything still be waiting for him? Those thoughts weren't always easy. There were evenings when Robinson sat alone and thought about the arenas, the squeak of shoes on the hardwood, the roar of the crowd. But the next morning, he put on his uniform and continued his duties. Robinson had chosen this path. He believed honor wasn't something you could leave behind when a bigger opportunity appeared. It was precisely during those 2 years of waiting that something special began to form in Robinson. He learned patience. He learned to accept that success doesn't always come right away. And he learned that sometimes the road to glory has to pass through very long periods of silence. Meanwhile, in San Antonio, Spurs fans were also waiting. They knew their team had drafted someone special. But they also knew they had to be patient. 2 years. 2 years before Robinson could step onto an NBA court. 2 years for hope not to fade. 2 years to imagine the future. During that time, Robinson didn't score a single point for the Spurs. He didn't play a single minute in the NBA, but his name was still mentioned everywhere. People called him by a nickname that reflected both his military past and the respect he commanded, the Admiral. And as his final days of service drew to a close, the entire NBA began to realize they were waiting for something rare, a player who didn't just bring talent but also the discipline of the military, the patience of 2 years of waiting, and the hunger to prove that his sacrifice wasn't meaningless. But during those years, Robinson understood something more deeply than anyone. Sometimes waiting is more painful than failure. Because failure, at least, is a game that has been played. Waiting is standing on the sidelines, watching the game go on without you. And Robinson had to endure that for 2 long years. Those 2 years of waiting finally came to an end when David Robinson officially stepped into the National Basketball Association in the 1989-1990 season. It wasn't just the debut of a rookie. For the San Antonio Spurs, it was like the arrival of the savior they had waited for through 2 long years. While Robinson was fulfilling his Navy obligation, the Spurs had sunk deep into crisis. In the 1988-1989 season, the team won only 21 games, one of the worst records in franchise history. The stands were sparse, hope nearly exhausted. San Antonio fans clung to one fragile belief, that one day Robinson would arrive and change everything. And when that day finally came, the city held its breath. Robinson stepped onto the court with the calm demeanor of a naval officer. But in the eyes of the fans, he carried a responsibility greater than any rookie had ever shouldered. He wasn't just expected to play well, he was expected to save an entire franchise. From his very first games, Robinson proved that San Antonio's 2-year wait wasn't in vain. At 7 feet tall, with rare speed for a center and exceptional defensive skills, he quickly became the centerpiece of every strategy. Robinson's blocks forced opponents to change their attacks. His powerful dunks ignited the crowd. But what set Robinson apart wasn't just physical strength, it was his near-absolute discipline. In every game, he played like a soldier on a mission. No flash, no showboating, just focus and determination. The results appeared almost immediately. In just one season, the Spurs transformed from a terrible team into a playoff contender. Their record jumped to 56 wins, one of the biggest single-season improvements in NBA history at the time. Robinson averaged more than 24 points, more than 12 rebounds, and nearly 4 blocks per game. Numbers that made the entire league take notice. At the end of the season, he was awarded Rookie of the Year, the NBA's top rookie honor. But along with those achievements came an enormous burden that began to take shape. San Antonio didn't just see Robinson as a player, they saw him as a symbol. Fans placed absolute faith in him. The media called him the Admiral, not just for his Navy past, but for the way he led the team like a commander. Every win was celebrated as Robinson's triumph, but that also meant a harsh truth. Every loss would be tied to his name. The Spurs at that time weren't a complete roster yet. They lacked depth, lacked other big stars. In many games, Robinson practically carried the entire team on his shoulders. He scored, defended, rebounded, directed the defense, and inspired his teammates. When the Spurs won, Robinson was hailed as a hero. But when they lost, questions began to arise. Did Robinson have what it took to lead the team to a championship? Could he single-handedly take the Spurs past the NBA's powerhouses? Those questions weren't always fair. Basketball is a team sport. But in the eyes of the fans, Robinson wasn't just a player. He was hope. And when hope is placed on one single person, the pressure can become overwhelming. Robinson rarely complained. He still wore that familiar, calm smile every time he stepped onto the court. But those close to him knew the pressure was real. In every game, Robinson wasn't just playing for himself. He was playing for the entire city of San Antonio. for the people who had waited for him through 2 long years, for a franchise trying to reclaim its pride, and sometimes that burden made victory feel much lighter than defeat. Because when Robinson shone, the whole city cheered, but when he couldn't save the team from loss, the silence in the stands hurt more than any criticism ever could. In his early years in the NBA, Robinson became one of the league's most outstanding players. He was consistently selected to the All-Star team, became an MVP candidate, and was a center every team had to respect. But behind that spotlight was a truth few recognized. Robinson was carrying more on his shoulders than any young player should have to. He wasn't just the Spurs' star. He was the sole pillar the entire city had bet its future on. And when one person becomes the symbol of hope, it also means that every crack in that dream will eventually come back to weigh heavily on that very person. In the early years of the 1990s, David Robinson quickly became one of the most respected players in the National Basketball Association. He stood out not only for his talent, but also for the way he carried himself. Robinson was polite in interviews, humble in victory, and rarely said harsh words about opponents. In a league famous for strong personalities and sometimes aggression, he was like an exception. Many people called him the gentleman of the NBA. He often signed autographs for fans after games, participated in community activities in San Antonio, and always showed respect for both teammates and opponents. For the city of San Antonio, Robinson wasn't just a basketball star. He was a moral icon, a talented player who still maintained humility and dignity. But the NBA wasn't always an environment for gentleness. That league was a place of physical contact, fierce competition, and big personalities ready to crush anyone in their way. And in that context, Robinson's gentle nature gradually became a topic of debate. When the Spurs won, Robinson was praised as an exemplary leader. But when the team failed in the playoffs, the tone of commentators began to change. A phrase slowly started appearing on sports shows and analysis articles: "Robinson is too nice to be a champion." Robinson was too kind to become a champion. It sounded like a mild comment, but it carried the weight of a verdict. In the NBA of that era, champions were usually associated with very different images. Michael Jordan was famous for his ruthlessness in competition. Larry Bird could taunt opponents right on the court. Magic Johnson was a leader with a strong, intense personality. In that world, Robinson, with his gentle smile and calm demeanor, seemed to not fit the mold of a conqueror. The criticisms began to pile up with each playoff season. The Spurs often had very strong regular seasons. Robinson consistently scored, rebounded, and blocked with impressive numbers. He was selected to the All-Star team year after year, but when they entered the playoffs, the team repeatedly fell short against stronger opponents. And each time, Robinson's name was put under the microscope by analysts. They said he was too soft, that he lacked the aggression needed to dominate opponents in the biggest games. Some commentators even claimed Robinson lacked killer instinct, the finishing drive that great superstars must have. For Robinson, those words were never easy to hear, but he rarely responded publicly. He kept his familiar, calm composure. After every loss, he usually stood in front of the microphone, took responsibility, and said the team needed to play better. For Robinson, leadership wasn't about blaming others, but that very humility sometimes made critics even more convinced of their view. They saw a player willing to take the blame and interpreted it as a sign of lacking intensity. The reality inside Robinson was far more complex. Behind the gentle smile in front of the cameras was a silent battle. He knew he was carrying the entire city of San Antonio on his shoulders. He knew that with each passing season without a championship, the pressure on him only grew. Robinson trained harder every year. He improved his conditioning, his offensive skills, and his defense. He studied opponents, reviewed game tape, and found ways to elevate himself. But sometimes, no matter how hard he tried, Basketball is a sport of many variables. A team can't win a championship with just one player. Yet in the public eye, Robinson remained the center of every question. When the Spurs won, it was because of Robinson. When the Spurs lost, many people also believed Robinson wasn't enough. And through each playoff season, the phrase, "too nice to be a champion," kept repeating like a shadow. The most painful part was that Robinson understood it all too clearly. He heard those comments, he read those articles, but he still chose silence. Because deep down, Robinson believed that a person's worth isn't determined by aggression or ruthlessness. He believed you could compete with everything you had while still keeping your character. But in the world of the NBA in the 1990s, that belief made Robinson seem like a warrior stepping into battle with a different weapon from everyone else. And behind the calm smile the audience saw every time he stepped onto the court, a war no one could see was really taking place. A war between honor and doubt, between kindness and a league that always demanded ruthlessness to survive. The pressure built up through each season finally converged at a moment that seemed destined to become the pinnacle of glory in David Robinson's career. In the 1994-1995 season, Robinson played near-perfect basketball. He scored, defended, rebounded, and led the San Antonio Spurs to one of the most successful seasons in the franchise's history up to that point. Averaging more than 27 points per game, nearly 11 rebounds, and more than 3 blocks, Robinson became the centerpiece of every Spurs strategy. Fans in San Antonio looked to him as their guiding light. Analysts called him the most complete center of his generation. And when the season ended, Robinson received the most prestigious individual honor a player can achieve, the Most Valuable Player award of the National Basketball Association. It was a moment that seemed to answer all the previous doubts. The man once called too nice had now become the best player in the entire league. But in the NBA, individual awards are sometimes just a prelude to a bigger challenge. Because what truly defines a star's legacy isn't the regular season, but the playoffs. And it was there that Robinson faced the most painful test of his career. The Spurs' opponent in the Western Conference Finals that year was the Houston Rockets, a team led by one of the greatest centers in basketball history, Hakeem Olajuwon. Hakeem wasn't just an excellent player. He was a master of moves in the low post, with spins and fakes known as the dream shake that left even the best defenders off balance. And in that fateful series, the matchup between Robinson and Hakeem quickly became the focal point of the entire NBA. One side had the season's MVP. The other had a champion defending his throne. What happened next became one of the most painful chapters in playoff history. Hakeem played as if he was putting on a personal clinic, game after game. Robinson faced those spins, hook shots, and fadeaways that were nearly impossible to stop. Hakeem scored relentlessly, throwing the Spurs' defense into chaos. There were games where he scored more than 40 points. There were moments when Robinson stood right in front of him, defending with everything he had, but the ball still went in. The Spurs were gradually overwhelmed by Houston, and when the series ended with a Rockets victory, the story the media told was no longer about a normal playoff series. It became the story of how Hakeem had dominated Robinson. The sports press showed no mercy. Headlines appeared across the country. One of them became a phrase that haunted Robinson for many years afterward. The MVP who disappears when it matters most. The MVP who vanishes when the games matter most. For Robinson, that wasn't just criticism. It was a cut to his honor. He knew basketball is a team sport. The Spurs didn't lose because of one person, but in the public eye, that series was reduced to one image: Hakeem defeating Robinson. Television programs replayed every move, every dream shake that forced Robinson to step back. Analysts debated whether Robinson truly deserved the MVP title. And the familiar comments returned. Robinson was too nice. Robinson wasn't ruthless enough to dominate the playoffs. Robinson wasn't the kind of superstar who could carry a team to a championship. Robinson rarely refuted those criticisms, but those close to him knew that series had left a deep wound, not because he lost to a great opponent. In sports, defeat is inevitable. What hurt more was the way that defeat was narrated to the entire world. Robinson still stepped onto the court with his familiar smile in the seasons that followed. But inside, the memory of the series against Hakeem never fully faded. It became a cruel reminder that in the NBA, a player's legacy can be defined by just a few games, and in the eyes of many at that time, Robinson, the league MVP, was remembered most for the moment he was outplayed by another opponent. That wasn't just a playoff loss, it was the biggest wound to his honor. A wound that Robinson would carry for many years afterward, until he had the chance to rewrite his own story. The criticisms following that fateful playoff series still echoed as David Robinson entered the following seasons. He continued to play excellently and remained the cornerstone of the San Antonio Spurs, but the body of a center nearly 7 feet tall had begun to pay the price for years of brutal physical contact in the National Basketball Association. Fans watching Robinson play only saw his powerful dunks and thunderous blocks, but few understood that with each passing season, the strain on his body grew heavier. Tall centers in the NBA often endure collision intensity that few other positions experience. Every jump, every landing, every clash with opponents weighing over 200 pounds was a test for his knees, spine, and legs. Robinson had battled that for many years, but then the 1996-1997 season arrived like an unavoidable storm. It all started with an injury that seemed not too serious. Then a second injury appeared, and after that, a third. Robinson suffered a broken foot, a devastating blow to any athlete, especially a center who relied so heavily on strength and explosiveness. Soon afterward, back problems began to emerge. Robinson's spine, already under immense pressure from his extraordinary height, now became a source of persistent pain. Training days grew difficult, recovery sessions stretched for hours. Robinson began to realize that the body he had once trusted completely was slowly turning against him. The 1996-1997 season quickly turned into a nightmare. Robinson missed most of the season due to injuries. For the Spurs, it was like losing the heart of the team. In the years before, Robinson had been the pillar keeping the team steady. Without him, the Spurs seemed directionless. Losses began to pile up. The team went from a playoff contender to one of the worst records in the league. Fans in San Antonio saw something they had never seen before. The Spurs no longer had Robinson to lean on, and Robinson watched the season slip away from the sidelines. For an athlete always accustomed to competing, nothing hurt more than sitting and watching teammates fight without being able to help. He rehabbed every day, trying to return as soon as possible. But every time he pushed the intensity, the pain returned like a reminder that his body wasn't ready. There were days Robinson walked into the gym with hope and walked out in silence, because no one could say for sure if he would ever come back the same. In previous seasons, Robinson had always carried the expectations of the entire city. But now, for the first time in his career, he faced a question more terrifying than any media criticism. What if my career is already over? For a player who had dedicated his entire life to being the best on the court, that thought was like an abyss. Robinson didn't talk much about that fear in public. He still appeared with his familiar smile, still said he was recovering, that everything would be okay. But in private moments, the question kept returning. What if my career is already over? What if everything he had built, years of training, games, the hopes of an entire city ended because of an injury? That season ended with the Spurs' dismal record. But for Robinson, what mattered more wasn't the number of losses. It was the silent battle with his own body. He had to learn patience once again. Just like in the years he waited after being drafted, recover step by step, accept that he couldn't control everything, and hope that the body that had once made him one of the greatest centers in the league still had enough strength to give him one more chance. But at that point, even Robinson wasn't sure if that chance truly existed. The nightmare season ended with more questions than answers. David Robinson was still in recovery, while the San Antonio Spurs had sunk to the bottom of the National Basketball Association standings. But it was precisely in that collapse that a major turning point in the franchise's history began to take shape. The terrible performance in the 1996-1997 season unintentionally positioned the Spurs for a special spot in the 1997 draft. And when draft day arrived, San Antonio made a decision that would change the entire future of the franchise. They selected Tim Duncan with the #1 pick. Duncan entered the NBA with enormous hype from Wake Forest University. Tall, composed, extremely intelligent, and nearly flawless in fundamental skills, Duncan was regarded by many experts as one of the surest talents in years. But for Robinson, Duncan's arrival meant far more than just a new team contract. He understood exactly what it signified. A new star had arrived. A new future was beginning, and that future might no longer revolve around him. In the world of professional sports, this is often a very difficult moment for legends to accept. Stars accustomed to being the center of the team often react with resistance or cold silence when a successor appears. Because for many, being #1 isn't just a role on the team, it's their identity. It's what defines who they are. Robinson had every reason to feel that way. For nearly a decade, the Spurs had been built around him. The city of San Antonio saw him as their guiding light. He was an all-star, an MVP, the face of the entire franchise. But Robinson also understood something not every legend is willing to admit. Time always moves forward. Injuries had shown him that clearly. His body was no longer invincible as before, and if the Spurs wanted to become a true championship team, they needed a new generation. When Robinson first practiced with Duncan, many people noticed something special. There was no hidden competition, no suspicious glances. Robinson didn't look at Duncan as a replacement. He looked at Duncan as a new opportunity for the team. Duncan was younger, healthier, and could become the center of the Spurs for many years to come. But Robinson understood that didn't diminish the value of what he had built. Instead of trying to hold on to the central role, Robinson chose a path rarely seen in professional sports. He became a guide for the new generation. In the locker room, Robinson helped Duncan understand the Spurs' culture. On the practice court, he shared experience on how to handle the biggest centers in the NBA, and on the game floor, Robinson gradually accepted his new role, not as the sole star anymore, but as part of a duo that could change the entire league. The combination of Robinson and Duncan quickly became one of the most fearsome front-court pairs in the NBA. Robinson remained a reliable defensive wall. Duncan brought stability and excellent technique in the low post. But what made this duo special wasn't just talent, it was humility. Robinson never tried to prove the team still belonged to him. He didn't fight for the spotlight with Duncan. Instead, he was willing to step back one step so the team could move forward too. For many fans, that was the moment they understood Robinson's character more clearly. He wasn't just a great player, he was a true leader. Because leadership isn't always about standing in front. Sometimes, leadership is knowing when to step back so others can move forward. And as Tim Duncan began to enter his prime, Robinson didn't resist that change. He accepted it. He supported it. And by doing so, Robinson laid the foundation for a new era of the Spurs, an era in which he would play a crucial role in a very different way than before. The criticisms following that fateful playoff series still echoed as David Robinson entered the following seasons. He continued to play excellently and remained the cornerstone of the San Antonio Spurs. but the body of a center nearly 7 feet tall had begun to pay the price for years of brutal physical contact in the National Basketball Association. Fans watching Robinson play only saw his powerful dunks and thunderous blocks, but few understood that with each passing season, the strain on his body grew heavier. Tall centers in the NBA often endure collision intensity that few other positions experience. Every jump, every landing, every clash with opponents weighing over 200 pounds was a test for his knees, spine, and legs. Robinson had battled that for many years. But then the 1996-1997 season arrived like an unavoidable storm. It all started with an injury that seemed not too serious. Then a second injury appeared, and after that, a third. Robinson suffered a broken foot, a devastating blow to any athlete, especially a center who relied so heavily on strength and explosiveness. Soon afterward, back problems began to emerge. Robinson's spine, already under immense pressure from his extraordinary height, now became a source of persistent pain. Training days grew difficult. Recovery sessions stretched for hours. Robinson began to realize that the body he had once trusted completely was slowly turning against him. The 1996-1997 season quickly turned into a nightmare. Robinson missed most of the season due to injuries. For the Spurs, it was like losing the heart of the team. In the years before, Robinson had been the pillar keeping the team steady. Without him, the Spurs seemed directionless. Losses began to pile up. The team went from a playoff contender to one of the worst records in the league. Fans in San Antonio saw something they had never seen before. The Spurs no longer had Robinson to lean on, and Robinson watched the season slip away from the sidelines. For an athlete always accustomed to competing, nothing hurt more than sitting and watching teammates fight without being able to help. He rehabbed every day, trying to return as soon as possible. But every time he pushed the intensity, the pain returned like a reminder that his body wasn't ready. There were days Robinson walked into the gym with hope and walked out in silence, because no one could say for sure if he would ever come back the same. In previous seasons, Robinson had always carried the expectations of the entire city, but now, for the first time in his career, he faced a question more terrifying than any media criticism. What if my career is already over? For a player who had dedicated his entire life to being the best on the court, that thought was like an abyss. Robinson didn't talk much about that fear in public. He still appeared with his familiar smile, still said he was recovering, that everything would be okay. But in private moments, the question kept returning. What if my career is already over? What if everything he had built, years of training, games, the hopes of an entire city ended because of an injury? That season ended with the Spurs' dismal record, but for Robinson, what mattered more wasn't the number of losses. It was the silent battle with his own body. He had to learn patience once again, just like in the years he waited after being drafted, recover step by step, accept that he couldn't control everything, and hope that the body that had once made him one of the greatest centers in the league still had enough strength to give him one more chance. But at that point, even Robinson wasn't sure if that chance truly existed. The nightmare season ended with more questions than answers. David Robinson was still in recovery, while the San Antonio Spurs had sunk to the bottom of the National Basketball Association standings. But it was precisely in that collapse that a major turning point in the franchise's history began to take shape. The terrible performance in the 1996-1997 season unintentionally positioned the Spurs for a special spot in the 1997 draft, and when draft day arrived, San Antonio made a decision that would change the entire future of the franchise. They selected Tim Duncan with the #1 pick. Duncan entered the NBA with enormous hype from Wake Forest University. Tall, composed, extremely intelligent, and nearly flawless in fundamental skills, Duncan was regarded by many experts as one of the surest talents in years. But for Robinson, Duncan's arrival meant far more than just a new team contract. he understood exactly what it signified. A new star had arrived. A new future was beginning, and that future might no longer revolve around him. In the world of professional sports, this is often a very difficult moment for legends to accept. Stars accustomed to being the center of the team often react with resistance or cold silence when a successor appears. Because for many, being number one isn't just a role on the team, it's their identity. It's what defines who they are. Robinson had every reason to feel that way. For nearly a decade, the Spurs had been built around him. The city of San Antonio saw him as their guiding light. He was an all-star, an MVP, the face of the entire franchise. But Robinson also understood something not every legend is willing to admit. Time always moves forward. Injuries had shown him that clearly. His body was no longer invincible as before, and if the Spurs wanted to become a true championship team, they needed a new generation. When Robinson first practiced with Duncan, many people noticed something special. There was no hidden competition, no suspicious glances. Robinson didn't look at Duncan as a replacement. He looked at Duncan as a new opportunity for the team. Duncan was younger, healthier, and could become the center of the Spurs for many years to come. But Robinson understood that didn't diminish the value of what he had built. Instead of trying to hold on to the central role, Robinson chose a path rarely seen in professional sports. He became a guide for the new generation. In the locker room, Robinson helped Duncan understand the Spurs' culture. On the practice court, he shared experience on how to handle the biggest centers in the NBA. And on the game floor, Robinson gradually accepted his new role, not as the sole star anymore, but as part of a duo that could change the entire league. The combination of Robinson and Duncan quickly became one of the most fearsome front-court pairs in the NBA. Robinson remained a reliable defensive wall. Duncan brought stability and excellent technique in the low post. But what made this duo special wasn't just talent, it was humility. Robinson never tried to prove the team still belonged to him. He didn't fight for the spotlight with Duncan. Instead, he was willing to step back one step so the team could move forward too. For many fans, that was the moment they understood Robinson's character more clearly. He wasn't just a great player, he was a true leader. Because leadership isn't always about standing in front. Sometimes, leadership is knowing when to step back so others can move forward. And as Tim Duncan began to enter his prime, Robinson didn't resist that change. He accepted it. He supported it. And by doing so, Robinson laid the foundation for a new era of the Spurs' era, in which he would play a crucial role in a very different way than before. Tim Duncan's arrival didn't just bring new hope to the San Antonio Spurs. It also marked a difficult but profoundly meaningful phase in David Robinson's life. After many years as the absolute center of the team, Robinson began stepping into a different role, one that demanded greater humility than any challenge he had ever faced on the court. When the new season started, Robinson was still one of the best centers in the National Basketball Association. He still defended superbly, rebounded powerfully, and could score when needed. But Robinson understood that the team's structure was changing. Duncan was younger, healthier, and had the potential to become the star leading the Spurs for years to come. That meant Robinson had to make an important decision, one that not every legend has the courage to make. He could try to hold on to the central role, demand the ball more, continue leading every stat category. Or he could do the harder thing, step back one step. Robinson chose the second path, not because he had weakened, not because he could no longer dominate games, but because he understood something very simple yet rarely accepted in professional sports: the team matters more than personal ego. On the court, the shift gradually became clear. Duncan began receiving more post touches. Robinson focused more on defense, rebounding, and tactical support. Instead of being the hub of every play, he became the quiet pillar keeping the system running smoothly. To the fans, this transition happened quite naturally. The Spurs grew stronger. Their defense became one of the most feared systems in the NBA. Duncan and Robinson formed an almost impenetrable wall under the basket. Many began talking about San Antonio's Twin Towers as one of the league's most intimidating front-court duos. But few truly understood how much Robinson had sacrificed for that transition to go smoothly. In sports, reputation and ego are often intertwined. A player who was once an MVP, once the icon of an entire city, doesn't easily accept becoming a supporting figure for the new generation. Robinson had carried the Spurs for nearly a decade. Every win had been tied to his name. Every loss had fallen on his shoulders. And now, he had to accept that the spotlight would gradually shift to someone else. Robinson rarely spoke about it to the media. He still smiled, still said Duncan was the future of the team, that the Spurs were stronger with both leading. But those who knew Robinson understood that letting go wasn't easy at all. Because releasing personal glory is sometimes harder than fighting to earn it, Robinson had to swallow the pride that any great athlete possesses. He had to accept that he was no longer the center of every story, and every time the crowd cheered for one of Duncan's plays, Robinson knew that was exactly what he had chosen. But it was precisely that sacrifice that made the Spurs special. While many other teams were divided by the egos of their stars, San Antonio became more united. Robinson and Duncan didn't compete with each other. They complemented each other. Robinson brought experience, composure, and leadership spirit. Duncan brought youth, stability, and a long-term future for the team. And from that combination, the Spurs gradually became a true powerhouse. A new culture formed in the locker room, where humility and team spirit were placed above personal fame. Robinson didn't just help the Spurs win on the court. He helped shape the identity of the entire franchise, an identity that many would later call the Spurs way, playing for the team, not for the self. But few remember that the foundation of that philosophy began with Robinson's quiet decision, learning to let go of personal greatness so the team could become greater. And sometimes, the greatest sacrifices in sports aren't in game-winning shots or legendary performances. They lie in the moments when a legend chooses to step back, so history can move forward. Those quiet years of sacrifice finally led David Robinson to the moment he had waited for through nearly his entire career. As the 1998-1999 season entered its decisive phase, the San Antonio Spurs were no longer the fragile team of previous years. They had become a solid collective with ferocious defense and iron discipline. The Robinson-Tim Duncan duo became the heart of that system. Duncan brought youth and stability. Robinson brought experience, composure, and the sacrifices few people saw. The Spurs advanced deep into the playoffs with a demeanor entirely different from before. No more fragility. No more familiar doubts that Robinson would collapse in big games. San Antonio played like a disciplined machine. They overcame every opponent with tight defense and team play. When the Spurs reached the 1999 NBA Finals, the entire city of San Antonio knew they stood before a historic moment. Their opponents were the New York Knicks, a team full of fighting spirit. But this time, the Spurs weren't afraid. Duncan dominated the low post with icy calm. Robinson defended, rebounded, and became the shield protecting the entire system. The decisive games unfolded in an atmosphere of tension that Robinson had experienced far too many times in the past. But this time, the story didn't end in defeat. When the final buzzer sounded, the Spurs became NBA champions. Robinson stood on the court amid the roar of tens of thousands of fans. After nearly a decade of doubt, after criticisms that he was too nice to be a champion, Robinson finally had the ring many once said he would never get. It wasn't just a title. It was an answer to the headlines that had once mocked him. an answer to the commentators who said Robinson lacked the grit to win when the pressure was greatest. And above all, it was redemption. Robinson didn't celebrate like someone who had just won an ordinary game. That moment carried the weight of years of failure, years of doubt, years of being compared to other legends. He had heard all those words. He had carried them throughout his career, but instead of responding with words, Robinson answered with time, with patience, with a decision to sacrifice his central role so the team could become stronger. And when the championship trophy finally rested in the Spurs' hands, Robinson understood that his journey was no longer defined by that painful playoff series years ago. His legacy wasn't the story of an MVP who got beaten. His legacy was the story of a man patient enough to turn doubt into victory. That championship ring didn't just close one season. It closed a long chapter of skepticism and opened a new one in Spurs' history, a dynasty, built not only on talent but also on the humility and sacrifice Robinson had chosen years earlier. After that emotional crowning moment, many thought David Robinson's story was finally complete. The championship ring with the San Antonio Spurs seemed to erase all the years of doubt, criticism, and failure. But for Robinson, that victory wasn't the only thing that kept him standing through his pressure-filled journey in the National Basketball Association. What truly kept him from collapsing during the hardest years lay in a place few people talked about: his faith. From a very young age, Robinson was raised in a family that valued spiritual principles and moral discipline. His father, a naval officer, believed honor and duty mattered more than any personal achievement. That environment shaped a crucial part of who Robinson became, but it was only when he entered the brutal world of the NBA that he truly needed his faith more than ever. During the years of harshest criticism, especially after the painful playoff series against Hakeem Olajuwon, Robinson often turned to silence instead of reacting to the media. He read the Bible, prayed, and tried to remind himself that basketball wasn't the entire meaning of life. That didn't mean Robinson didn't care about winning. He was an extremely serious competitor on the court. But he believed a person's worth couldn't be measured solely by points scored or titles won. In a league where many players got swept up in fame, money, and performance pressure, Robinson tried to keep a quiet corner of peace in his soul. His faith helped him endure criticism without becoming bitter. When commentators said he was too nice to be a champion, Robinson didn't try to prove them wrong with retorts. He kept training, kept playing, and kept living by the principles he believed were right. There were nights after playoff losses when Robinson went home feeling crushing disappointment. But instead of letting failure destroy him, he tried to place everything in a bigger picture. Basketball was part of life, but not all of life. Faith also helped Robinson hold on to his character in an environment that often encouraged aggression and big egos. Many said Robinson was too kind for the NBA, but Robinson never saw kindness as weakness. He believed you could compete with everything you had while still respecting others. And over time, that very attitude made Robinson one of the most respected players in league history. Teammates trusted him. Coaches relied on him. Even opponents who battled him fiercely admitted Robinson was one of the most upright men they'd ever met in professional sports. For Robinson, faith wasn't just comfort in moments of failure. It was the compass that guided him through tough career decisions, from accepting Navy service before entering the NBA to stepping back so Tim Duncan could become the Spurs' centerpiece. Those decisions didn't always bring personal glory. But Robinson believed life isn't judged only by what you gain, but by how you treat others and how you hold your values when things get hard. And it was that quiet faith that carried Robinson through years of doubt, failure, and pressure without losing himself. Because for him, the greatest victory wasn't the NBA championship trophy. The greatest victory was still being himself after everything the harsh world of sports threw at him. In the years after the first championship, David Robinson gradually entered the final phase of his career. time, the one thing no athlete can defeat began leaving clear marks on his body. His jumps were no longer as effortless as before. Collisions under the basket left lingering pain longer after each game. His back ached constantly. His knees could no longer handle the intensity they did in his 20s. When the 2002-2003 season began, Robinson was 37 years old. In a league where most players had long retired at that age, Robinson kept fighting, but he knew very well this might be his final season with the San Antonio Spurs. On the court, Robinson was no longer the offensive centerpiece as he once was. That role now belonged entirely to Tim Duncan, who had become one of the best players in the world. But Robinson didn't see that change as a loss. He saw it as a circle closing. The man who had carried the Spurs for so many years now became a protector for the next generation. Robinson still played a key role in the team's defensive system. He still rebounded, still blocked shots, still brought experience the younger players couldn't have. But every game, his body reminded him that his time was running out. There were mornings. Robinson woke up with pain spreading through his back and legs. There were days he spent hours recovering before stepping onto the court. But Robinson kept playing because he wanted to end his career the way a warrior should, on the floor, with his team. That season, the Spurs became one of the strongest teams in the National Basketball Association. Duncan played at the peak of his powers. The team's defensive system remained disciplined and effective. And Robinson, though at the end of his career, remained an important part of that structure. When the Spurs reached the 2003 NBA Finals, Robinson knew he stood before his last chance to close his long journey with a victory. Their opponents were the New Jersey Nets, a young and energetic team. But the Spurs entered the series with the calm of those who had been through too many battles. Duncan dominated the series with near-perfect performances. Robinson, though no longer a big scoring star, contributed with defense, experience, and the presence of a leader. When the final game ended, the Spurs became NBA champions for the second time in Robinson's career. But for Robinson, that moment held deeper meaning than any title. He stood in the middle of the court, looking at the San Antonio stands that had become his home for more than a decade. Cheers echoed throughout the arena. Teammates hugged him. Fans rose to applaud without stopping. Robinson knew this was the last time he would step onto an NBA court as a player. After the game, Robinson walked slowly around the floor, no longer the powerful strides of a center who once ruled the low post, but the quiet steps of a man saying goodbye. Tears appeared on his face, something rarely seen from Robinson throughout his career. The years of pressure, injuries, doubts, sacrifices, all seemed to converge in that moment. The crowd kept standing and clapping, not just for the victory, but because they understood they were witnessing the end of a special chapter in Spurs history. Robinson didn't leave the court like a superstar seeking one last spotlight. He left the way he had played his entire career, humble, calm, and full of dignity. An NBA giant closed his journey not with grand words, but with a gentle wave and sincere tears. And as Robinson walked into the tunnel toward the locker room for the final time, the entire arena understood that an era had ended. Not just the career of a great player, but the story of a man who proved true strength lies not only in physical ability, but also in character and steadfastness. After leaving the NBA floor in the summer of 2003, David Robinson's life entered a completely different chapter. For more than a decade, he had lived under the bright lights of the National Basketball Association, where every game was watched, every mistake dissected, and every success magnified. But when the final buzzer of his career sounded, Robinson did not step into the life of a retired superstar the way many imagined. He could have done that. With the fame, wealth, and respect he had accumulated, Robinson could have easily lived a luxurious life. He could have appeared on television shows, signed big endorsement deals, or enjoyed a peaceful existence at lavish resorts. But Robinson chose a different path, one quieter, yet far more meaningful. Throughout his career, Robinson always believed basketball was only part of life. It brought opportunities, fame, and money, but it was not the ultimate goal. After retiring, Robinson began devoting more time to his family, his faith, and projects he believed could change other people's lives. One of the most important projects for Robinson was education. He believed the greatest opportunity society could give a child wasn't money, but knowledge. So Robinson decided to invest millions of dollars from his own fortune to build a school for disadvantaged students in San Antonio. That school was named Carver Academy. When Robinson announced the project, many were surprised, not because an athlete was involved in charity, which was fairly common, but because of the depth of his commitment. Robinson didn't just donate money. He got directly involved in building and developing the school. He met with teachers, talked with students, and followed their progress. Robinson wanted Carver Academy to be a place where children with few opportunities could still receive a quality education. He believed that if a child was given the right chance at the right time, their life could change completely. For Robinson, this wasn't a publicity project. He rarely promoted himself through these activities. He didn't need media attention to prove he was doing the right thing. What mattered to Robinson was the real impact those efforts had on the community. Many years after Carver Academy was founded, hundreds of students graduated from the school and went on to college. For Robinson, each of those success stories meant more than any block or dunk from his basketball career. Robinson also got involved in many other charitable activities, especially programs supporting children and families in need. He used his fame not to draw attention to himself, but to draw resources to organizations that needed help. People who worked with Robinson often said what impressed them most wasn't what he did on the court. It was how he lived after leaving it. Robinson never saw himself as the center of the story. He saw himself as someone responsible for using the opportunities he had received to help others. In a world where many athletes get caught up in wealth and fame, Robinson held on to the simple philosophy he had followed since his days as a Naval Academy cadet. A person's true value lies in what they give to others. Robinson once said that when all the titles and records are forgotten, the only thing left is how you affected the lives of those around you. For him, that was the real legacy. And so Robinson didn't try to live like a retired basketball legend. He chose to live like a man still trying to make the world around him a little better. Because for Robinson, greatness isn't the number of titles you win. Greatness is the doors you open for those who come after. After all those years on the court, after the titles, the battles, and the historic moments, David Robinson's story ultimately isn't just about basketball. It's the story of a man who chose the harder path, the path of character. In the history of the National Basketball Association, many legends are remembered for their ruthlessness in competition, for overpowering performances that made opponents tremble. Robinson wasn't that kind of legend. He wasn't the most ferocious player on the court. He wasn't the highest scorer in history. He also wasn't someone who sought attention or tried to build an image as a fearsome warrior. But Robinson represented a different kind of greatness, a rare kind in professional sports. He led with character. Throughout his career with the San Antonio Spurs, Robinson always put the team above personal ego. He carried the team when they were at their weakest. He endured criticism when the team failed. And when the time came, he was willing to step back so the new generation, especially Tim Duncan, could step forward. Not every legend can do that, because letting go of personal spotlight is sometimes much harder than fighting to earn it. Robinson won with humility. When criticized for being too nice to be a champion, he didn't respond with anger. He kept working, kept playing, and kept living by the values he believed in. Many years later, when the final championship ring rested on his finger, Robinson didn't use it to mock those who once doubted him. He just smiled, because for Robinson, winning wasn't about proving others wrong. Winning was about staying true to himself through every challenge. Robinson also proved that greatness doesn't have to be ruthless. In a league where aggression is often seen as a sign of strength, Robinson showed that kindness and respect can coexist with fierce competition. Teammates trusted him. Coaches respected him. Even opponents who battled him in the toughest games admitted Robinson was one of the most upright men they ever met in the NBA. And when his career ended, Robinson didn't disappear from the world. He simply changed how he made an impact. In San Antonio, which had become his home for many years, Robinson continued contributing to the community through education and charity work. The Carver Academy he founded became a symbol of his philosophy that a person's real opportunity doesn't lie in natural talent, but in the doors opened by education and care. When Robinson reached his 60s, people no longer talked much about the dunks or blocks that once electrified arenas. Those moments remain part of basketball history, but Robinson's legacy had long extended beyond the court. He is remembered for how he overcame doubt when the world said he wasn't ruthless enough to win. He is remembered for how he faced failure without losing his dignity. And above all, he is remembered for choosing to be a better man, even when it didn't bring immediate attention or glory. In an era when many believe becoming a legend requires dominating, overpowering, and instilling fear, Robinson wrote a different story. A story of patience, humility, and the power of character, because there are legends who dominate games. But David Robinson did something rarer. He changed how the world understands what it means to be a legend. The story of David Robinson inspires both admiration and heartache, because behind the image of a San Antonio Spurs legend lies a journey filled with mental trials that not everyone sees. Throughout the story, there are moments that truly break the heart. When Robinson was doubted by the entire media after the playoff series against Hakeem Olajuwon, when headlines called him the MVP who disappears when it matters most, or when the 1996-1997 season nearly destroyed his career with a broken foot and back problems. Those were times when a person could easily become bitter or collapse. But Robinson didn't choose that path. Instead of reacting with anger, he found strength in his faith, continued living with humility, and held firm to his character. That's what makes the moment he lifted the NBA championship trophy in 1999 so much more moving than an ordinary win. It wasn't just a title. It was redemption after years of doubt. And when Robinson, at age 37, entered his final season to win that second ring alongside Tim Duncan, the image of him leaving the court in tears shows that even the strongest warriors carry a lot of silent pain. Even more admirable is that after retiring, Robinson didn't live like a wealthy star. Instead, he used millions of dollars to build Carver Academy, opening educational opportunities for poor children in San Antonio. That's the detail that makes his story transcend basketball. For Americans, the lesson from Robinson isn't just about sports. It's a lesson that true success doesn't lie in fame or money, but in how a person faces failure, how they hold their values when doubted, and how they use their success to help others. In a fiercely competitive society, Robinson reminds us that a person's greatest strength isn't ruthlessness, it's character. If the story of resilience, faith, and character of David Robinson makes you think, please hit subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the inspiring journeys of sports legends. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video where we'll open another story about people who overcame adversity to become icons.